You came to the UK directly from Germany. You arrived in Leeds, which at that time was a grimy and gritty city, as I think you've described it, something that was really symbolic of the rundown state of Britain. You've described it as a complete shock at times. I wonder if you can characterise the impression that first glimpse of the UK had on you.
Yeah, certainly. Well, thanks, Keshini, and it's tremendous to be here. So to have this conversation, and yeah, so my family had actually moved from Austria originally. So and a lot of my sort of childhood memories are also very much from Austria, which is where grandparents were. But my parents had moved to Germany, which is where I was born and brought up for the first 10 years of my life. And so I guess I'd experienced a sort of a rather beautiful, idyllic Austria with mountains and lakes and just a gorgeous place that I love going back to still today on holiday to relax. And then to move to a German city, it was called Karlsruhe in the southwest of Germany, a very modern, well-industrialized city, modern tram systems, and I remember as a 8, 9, 10-year-old getting on the tram, going into the city and going shopping, on my own. That's what you did back then, and everything just worked and it was all efficient and and it was all rather good. And then my mother decided that she would marry an Englishman. We'd been brought up, me and my brother, as by my mother alone up until that point, and so she married an Englishman, and I had no choice in the matter. It was just announced that I'm marrying this chap, and we're going to England. And I guess on the one side there was some excitement, but also you can imagine at 10 years old back in 1974, that was a lot of fear. But we were persuaded this was going to be a great thing, and then to arrive in Leeds, it really was a huge shock. Even though we lived in not a bad suburb of Leeds, the place was just incredibly run down. And the thought of, we did try it, there was no tram, so, you'd get on a bus to go into Leeds, and, that was all a bit run down and not very pleasant at all. And then you got into Leeds city centre, and it was derelict, the buildings were dark, it was run down, it was just not a very nice place, and just things around you just looked old-fashioned. The car my father was driving, or my stepfather, he was driving this Morris Marina. The older people amongst us in the room will remember what one of those was. And we had left an Opel Kadett behind, and the Opel Kadett would happily get us to Austria 2 or 3 times a year, always reliable. The Morris Marina, we used to travel at weekends to see my step-grandmother in Bishop Auckland in the northeast, and it didn't make a trip without breaking down. And this to me just became Britain of the 1970s, something that just didn't work. And then of course we entered into what was called the Winter of Discontent, which was sort of 75 going into 76, and it was just unbelievable.
Did that make you much more determined, if you entered the industrial world, to change that picture of industrial Britain?
Absolutely, because I must admit I'd come to Britain, and remember in those days people didn't travel like we do today. So as a matter of fact, other than having gone to Austria, England was my first experience of travelling abroad. So it was Germany, Austria, and England was the first time I'd been anywhere abroad. So, you just lived by images, and images you had was of this, rather grand and amazing Great Britain, that obviously, had created the Industrial Revolution. And so it really was a big letdown. And so you are right, that I think it was, an inspiration to say, I'd like to be part of helping improve this. And so I remember engaging at a very young age. I became a sort of local debating societies, and I was also part of a young political circle at the time, because I was wanting to engage in something that clearly had gone quite horribly wrong.
So you decided to enter production engineering. At that time, did you have it in your mind that you could enter the world of engineering and change it?
Well, I mean, I think to have that ambition at, the age of, whenever, I mean, I guess I decided pretty early. I decided at sort of age 16, 17, it was pretty clear to me that, my career would take me into something technical at least. Exactly which stream of engineering I wasn't sure about. And actually it was interesting because, maybe we'll come back to that a little bit, but when skipping on a little bit, when I did my first industrial placement, so I was now on my production engineering degree at Nottingham Trent Polytechnic, as it was then, Nottingham Trent University. I decided to do my first industrial placement in Germany because actually I had become a little bit disillusioned with what I'd seen around me in the UK, and I thought, no, I think I might want to start my engineering career sort of back in Germany, where it's just a little bit more efficient, and actually the truth is the salaries were higher in Germany too. And that sort of does sway you a little bit at that age. And interestingly, it was when I got there that I realized how British I'd become, and I'd also realized that actually, and I was working in a factory in Germany, and it was so damn efficient. And I thought, I'm not sure how much difference I can make here. This is almost already too good. So, let me see if I can get involved in something, where maybe I can make a little bit of a difference. And that's exactly what I did on my second placement.
But you kept that German inspiration in your mind. You decided to join Siemens, a very conscious choice, I presume. But it was a choice that basically has stood you in very good stead for the whole of your career. You've stayed in Siemens for nearly 30 years.
Indeed, yeah, 29 years now, yeah. And well, I was very lucky. So, I went on to my production engineering degree, having not gained a scholarship or a sponsorship, as we called it back then. I had applied, but I'd been rejected from a number of companies. And it was through my first placement, which was with Siemens. So my first placement in Germany was with Siemens in a factory, actually in Karlsruhe, because Karlsruhe was convenient, because I had relatives there who could put me up, and it was from there that I then got some contacts back into Siemens in the UK, and it was through that I managed to get on a Siemens sponsorship, but actually sponsored by Siemens in the UK. And my second placement was in a factory in Congleton in Cheshire, where I actually then ended up doing my first proper job, if you like. So yes, and my decision to go and work for a German company, was based on my early experiences of Germany, was based on the fact that I could speak German, still can speak German, and I thought that would be helpful. But it was more about the fact that I quite liked this, German engineering strength, and maybe if I could, from that learn something that I could help bring to a British engineering environment, which, for some reason just hadn't progressed as much as it should have done.
You've had an amazing opportunity over the last 30 years to observe how engineering has grown in popularity and in recognition, indeed, by many governments across the world. Why do you think engineering is so important today?
Well, I mean, maybe if we just backtrack a little bit first, and I say this to a lot of young people, and that is, you've really hit, engineering as a career, at a pretty damn good point. The older of us in the room, we sort of lived through engineering in the dark ages of Great Britain. And by the way, that doesn't mean that there weren't a lot of great things going on an engineering and an innovation front in the UK, but it just, it wasn't trendy. It wasn't the career that people promoted. It wasn't something which people were shouting about as something that was a key value creator for the country. And actually, it was only about 10 years ago, and then really only about 8 years ago, when we started, or we were at the beginning of the financial crisis, that people really started to question, what are we doing in this country? What is it that's generating value? Is it the financial services industry alone? Is it our service industry? Or, do we actually need to go back and make more things, invent more things, and create more value in that way. And at the same time, it also became clear that we just hadn't invested well enough in our infrastructure. So we've got two things coming together. One is a realization that we have to make things and we have to export, and that we had fallen behind many other industrial nations and up-and-coming nations. And secondly, that we needed to invest in our infrastructure. And for both of those, you need lots of engineering talent.
And companies around the world are trying to encourage that engineering talent to come through in a very strong way. But we're also seeing a great deal of impact from the globalized economy. The fact that somebody working in London can work alongside people from many, many different countries. To the extent that engineering is a truly global field today, what more do you think can be done to encourage people to take a global view?
Well, I think the sort of two angles to that is so the one angle of globalization is that actually we are sometimes in a competitive environment. So on the one angle, you've got to say that, being part of a British engineering movement, which we as Siemens are here, and I personally like to contribute to here in the UK. As part of that, what we've got to do is we've got to innovate faster, we've got to invent faster, we've got to run our factories more productively and efficiently, so that we hold up in good competition against that happening in USA, China, other parts of Europe, etc. So on the one hand, there is a bit of a competitive element, but you are absolutely right. Sometimes to achieve that competition, you have to reach out and collaborate, which sort of might sound like a bit of a contradiction. But and very often Siemens will not run its innovations in one place alone. We will look to run partnerships between different Siemens entities around the world, collaborating with universities in different parts of the world, universities, innovation centers, and finding really the best of what's out there to create, the next generation product, software, whatever it is we're developing. So we are seeing, an increasing requirement to globalize and externalize our own R&D and innovation as well, because, we realize that, we do a lot of good things ourselves, but we can't have all of the best ideas in Siemens. A lot of those best ideas will happen in research institutes, universities, etc.
Do you think that somebody in Congleton or in Lagos or Caracas can actually link into that wider network? How do you encourage young people to take that truly global view?
Yeah, well, it's not that easy actually for somebody in Congleton to reach into, truly, I've been doing this and I'm now going to work in Lagos or something like that. But we do have really good platforms where people can communicate with one another. We have sort of social network platforms where people can communicate with one another, say, I've got this problem, has somebody else seen that same problem? And it's amazing how those social networks are working very efficiently to connect people across Siemens, across different divisions, but also between different countries. We do the same around innovation platforms. So on innovation platforms, there is a lot of people who will be communicating with different parts of Siemens, and very often we also do give the opportunity to people, who have worked in a particular place, have got an expertise, have set up a particular production line, to say, well, you've done that in Congleton, will you now help us set up something similar in China or somewhere else? So, we do move our skills around in that way, and I say, and also with that, give people tremendous opportunity to try something new and something different. And certainly, from my experience, to move around, try different things, live in different countries, these are all great experiences for your career.
Well, your company, Siemens, like many other multinationals, has operations which are truly spread across the world. Is there a danger that something of the original identity of a company, the core reason for its success, can be lost?
And absolutely, the answer is yes, and very large organizations, whether that's a Siemens or it could be a Google or a Vodafone, whoever they are, there is an issue with all of that strength and breadth and size that you can sometimes become a little bit too slow, not fast enough at driving your innovations. And all of us as organizations wrestle with this issue all the time. And and what we try to do is to instill a culture, to do as much as possible to empower at local level as much as possible. So Siemens doesn't operate as one entity with 350,000 people. You just couldn't possibly do that. So you break it down, into smaller divisions, then business units, segments, individual factories, and then in those factories, that's where you try and create more of the, maybe the faster innovation cycles, but always looking and learning where possible from the wider Siemens.
But at the macro level, why is a German company so appealing in Asia or indeed in Latin America, for example?
Yeah, well, I mean, you call us a German company, and we are a German company, but we do like to think of ourselves as a sort of a multi-local company, really. So, in Britain, we have a very British identity, and 93% of our people that work in our organisation, so 93% of our 14,000 people here are of British origin. 7% will be people who've migrated from Germany, the EU, or wider abroad. So we are very much part of the British a part of Britain's engineering fabric, in the same way as we would be in Argentina or China. So we do always put that very local angle on it. And actually, one of the other key things we do is we take our responsibility with regard to society in that regard very seriously. So we're definitely not the type of engineering organisation that says, we're going to invent and make everything in Germany, and then we're just going to ship it over the border and sell it all in different territories. It's much more about engaging locally, creating jobs, doing R&D, manufacturing locally, adding value, and making sure that through that, we have a positive impact on the society. And that's something which also helps get us out of bed in the morning. It gets me out of bed in the morning. I mean, I love selling things, and I love it when we win a big contract. That's very exciting, and you can celebrate that. But actually, the real lasting impression we leave is the people we employ, and through that, the value we create, the salaries we pay, and the value we put back into society.
But that German influence, nonetheless, is very strong. You've been a very passionate advocate of Industry 4.0, the so-called fourth industrial revolution. I wonder, in layman's terms, whether you could explain exactly what Industry 4.0 is and why it's having such an impact.
Yeah, well, I'll have a go. And in simple terms, it's actually quite easy. So when I used to run a factory, so I actually ended up running the factory that I've talked about a few times in Congleton. So I was the general manager there running a factory. And back in those days, you ran factories of the basis that you needed to standardize the product as much as possible. So as much as possible, make one product that you can pretty much in a standard way ship around the world. Not always quite as easy as that. And the principle was put volume into the factory, and volume and standards then drives high efficiencies within the factories. That was sort of very simply the philosophy of running efficient factories, let's say 20 years ago. Today, the philosophy is moving much more towards every product, every single item that runs through the production line being personalized to a particular individual who has ordered that product. But being able to do that in a way that is as productive or even more productive than the mass production I previously talked about. So Industry 4.0 is basically you being able to go online, personalize your product. So let's make it a car, and you pick exactly what you want out of thousands of variants. You can even have your name written on the headrest because that's just what you fancy. fancy. And by the way, because this production is so efficient, it's not going to cost you much more to do that, because it almost happens automatically. And then what will happen is that order will go into the production environment, and in the production environment, the factory will self-organize itself around the production. It will say, aha, here's a Jaguar Land Rover I've just ordered. It's going to be slightly longer than the normal version, so I'll go and pick up a certain chassis, and it will then start running down a production line, and the machines know it's your order, and they will say, this is Keshini that has ordered this, so I now need to do this. Right, where does it need to go next? Well, the next machine will tell this machine, I've now got capacity, so please send it over to me. So all of these machines and everything is communicating with one another. By the way, you can look into this production environment and see what's going on and where your product is, with webcams showing you what's happening, and ultimately this product of yours will come out of the other end. All the history of the production process is stored, and and you get delivered a fabulous product at a very, very good price, and you're happy because it's personalized to you personally. So that's the sort of
I'd be very happy indeed.
It's a very automated environment. Now, what's interesting about this is that to some people this sounds like a worry, because it says, well, everything is so automated, where are the people in this process? And the answer is very simple. The people are there, they're just doing much more interesting jobs. It's much more about the programming of the machines, it's much more about the software, it's much more about the cloud storage of all of this data. So it becomes much more mixing IT skills with software skills, and and I think these just become fascinating jobs in terms of planning, organizing factories, and the end result is we have such productive factories, we actually are able to bring more production onshore, closer to the customer, and together we actually create more value and more jobs locally, different jobs but more jobs, and it's better for the British economy.
Well, that's certainly a mesmerising vision for the future, but in the sense it's very easy to see why that could be very appealing and very effective in countries where there is a developed manufacturing base, countries like Germany, the UK, Japan, for example. What about emerging markets, emerging economies?
Yeah, well, I think there'll be two things. I mean, first of all, we do see Industry 4.0, if that's what we're going to call it, these heavily automated, autonomous factories, we're calling them. We very much see those actually as a way for high-wage economies, developed countries, to compete with lower wage economies. So actually we do see this as a way for Germany, for Great Britain, to be able to grow manufacturing and compete. Now, if we as Siemens then decide, okay, we do now want one of these factories to be, closer to the market, and, a market that we're looking to develop more is, for example, in various African territories, such as Nigeria, because the factories will have been designed so well, and they will have been designed digitally, so everything will have a digital footprint, it will actually be fairly straightforward to say, I'm just going to make a carbon copy of this, and I'm just going to take maybe a slightly smaller version of this factory, and I'm going to put that footprint in Nigeria. And actually, you'll even be able to get, those two factories communicating with each other. So if certain parts are needed from the British or German factory to go into, that can all be automated as well. So, there will be an opportunity to multiply and also, help developing countries to manufacture these types of products. But it is about very much Europe and the developed world maintaining its competitive edge.
That is a fascinating prospect, and I'm sure all the young engineers who are in the room today are dying to know what advice you'd give them to best take advantage of those opportunities that lie ahead.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the opportunities, I hope I've given some flavour. They really, really are vast and tremendous. So, one thing I always say to young people is, pick something which you feel you can be passionate about. I enjoy what I do because I'm genuinely passionate about, what Siemens does and what we contribute to society, what we do to improve transport infrastructure, what we do to help decarbonize in terms of energy supplies, and all of these things. It excites me, and therefore it's quite easy for me to keep up my energy levels and keep working hard, keep driving hard, because at the end of the day, through all of that hard work, you feel like you're helping. And I think that's what a lot of us want to do. We want to work hard, but at the end of the day, we want to see something as a result of our hard work as well. And so, I think feel something that you're really excited about and passionate. And, the other bit of advice, the obvious one is, of course, do work hard, and I think that's somebody, we all learn eventually. We all like this idea of making lots of money without working hard, and, there's very few people that achieve that dream. Forget that one probably, unless you're very lucky, and just do work hard. And the other piece of advice I always give is, work for an organization, or look for an organization where you believe you can buy into their values and their culture and how they work. Because, a lot of what we do in organizations is about, how people behave, how people work with one another, the culture that we create. And you might want to be in a much smaller company, a startup type environment where it's completely gung-ho, and it's real seat of your pants stuff, and you might be in work this week and not the next, and that might excite you, and that might be the culture that you like, or you might want to work for, an organization like Siemens, where it's slightly more long-term thinking, it's slightly more visionary in terms of, where we might be in 10 years' time. It's about collaboration, it's about teamwork. You might not be able to stand out as an individual quite so much, certainly in your early days, because you'll be part of a team. So work out what it is that you think you will fit into in terms of an organization, and feel comfortable within that. So, when you're getting interviewed by organizations, ask them about the culture, ask them about the management styles. What's it like to work here? And make sure you can feel comfortable with it.
Passion, vision, mission. Juergen Maier, thank you very much indeed for joining us here today. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.